Good afternoon, church family. It's Friday afternoon. I'm posting this a little bit early, but I had some things I wanted to do after this and didn't want to kind of stop in the middle of that to do this. So I'm just going to go ahead and post this, our apologetics video for the afternoon. Today, I'm going to go through a chapter, one of my favorite chapters in I guess, popular or entry level type apologetics. It's a good book. It's called When God Goes to Starbucks. When God Goes to Starbucks by Paul Copan. And so it's a neat book, but this is my favorite chapter out of it. And just to get you thinking about something, and particular, something we call relativism. This is the idea that basically what's true or good is kind of just relative to something else. So relativism works like this. And with Christianity, it's like, well, that's true for you, but it's not for me. Moralistic relativism is, well, that's okay if you think it's okay, or if that community thinks it's okay. It's okay if that community thinks it's wrong, then it's wrong. And so, right or wrong, and good and bad, and truth and error, there's no such real thing in relativism. It doesn't exist. And it's really, really big. Like, it's impossible for me to overstate how much relativism has influenced um, culture in the West, culture in America, and certainly really culture all over the world. Um, so we're going to talk about the bankruptcy that comes with moral relativism and leads nowhere. And Paul Copan deals with that in a very brief chapter. So I'm just going to go over through the highlights of the chapter with you, and hope you can find some good, helpful things in here. So Jack Kevorkian, we know him as Doctor of Death. You know, this is the guy who was all about assisted suicide. Actually served I think a 15-year sentence term over helping somebody commit suicide. He was a euthanasia doctor, and that was his specialty. And so he was known as Doctor Death. He died in 2011, so he's been gone almost 10 years now. Um, but he wrote that the Hippocratic Oath invoked doctors, and it does across the ages. The Hippocratic Oath, of course, is what doctors actually, the oath that they take, and saying, you know, medicine is meant to be responsible. So there's certain things the Hippocratic Oath lays out, and it says in part this: I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, nor will I make suggestions to this effect. In purity and holiness, I will guard my life and my art. So that comes directly from the Hippocratic Oath. The doctor must be committed not to killing, even if the patient says, relieve my suffering. Okay? In July of '96, the National Press Conference, Kevorkian was asked about his philosophy, and he said, it's quite simple. Absolute personal autonomy is what I believe in. I'm an absolute autonomist. Do and say whatever you want to do, and say at any time you want to do or say it, as long as you do not harm or threaten anybody else and their person or property. This statement gathered great applause. So he says, I'm an absolute autonomist, do anything you want to anybody. But then he gives a qualification, which means he's not an absolute autonomist. He just made a huge hypocritical statement is what he did. The statement of personal autonomy is heard often in our society that stresses individualism. What we are to make of this philosophy of absolute autonomous? What about that qualifier, just as long as you don't hurt anybody? So that's what we're going to examine. Okay. So, first of all, it's an irony in our society that people will deny moral standards or assert absolute autonomy, but then slip some other standard in the back door when no one's looking. We commonly hear people make sweeping relativistic claims, but then tack some absolute standard at the end of it. So they'll say things like this: people can do what they want just as long as they don't hurt anybody. Well, wait, they can't do anything they want then, right? So there is a standard and so that is hypocrisy. It's a self-defeating statement. How about this? You can do whatever you want as long as it's between two consenting adults. the standard is put onto that. You see, you can do whatever you want as long as it's in the privacy of your own home. We hear that, which we all know that's not true anyway. I mean, murder takes place in somebody's home. Well, they're criminally prosecuted, and we all agree that they should be. And I've never seen a moral relativist that didn't believe that to be the truth. So, how about this? People can believe and do whatever they want. They should just be tolerant of others' views. You can do what you want, just don't violate another person's rights. So, in essence, you're saying you don't have any limits whatsoever except this limitation. Let the autonomous fish or cut bait, is what Copan says. In other words, you need to either believe this or not. As soon as you begin to qualify these statements, you are no longer preaching autonomy at all. So, why should they have any regard for others at all? Why should privacy be respected? Why not be intolerant? The absolute autonomy of someone like Kevorkian is seriously compromised by the qualifications that they make. So, when he says also, and he points out this, of course, the greatest irony is Kevorkian says, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't bring harm to another, and yet he fatally harmed other people. And he was promoting that very thing as he said these things, okay? So the hypocrisy of this is actually should just be not only troubling, but even puzzling to anybody who's a thinking person. So we have that. And second, we have this. Upon scrutiny, slogans like this end up, of course, in self-destruction. Let's examine some of Copan's his examples of this. People can do whatever they want just as long as they don't hurt anyone. But what's wrong with hurting another person if you can get away with it? Well, I think that humans have value in themselves at all, especially if you're a naturalist who believes that we evolved from a valueless process. Why even care? Aren't there certain things that are wrong and harmful even if they happen in private? You'll never find a person who doesn't believe this, by the way. Everybody does. And they'll betray themselves at some point. A private affair can happen between two consenting adults. That does hurt somebody. It hurts whoever's the victim around that, people they love. Okay, so this is definitely a problem, right? That happens in private, but that's still wrong. A private stealing from someone who will never know the difference. Let's just say that you take some valuable thing from a very, very rich man, saying it doesn't make any difference. Is that not wrong? It's still wrong. It's still that you took something that wasn't yours. So what happens also in this, I want to point this out ethically, is what they do is they measure things the wrong way. Not only do they desert an absolute standard of wrong, they don't think about harm to yourself. Okay, if I'm doing something wrong, I'm actually harming my own self, my own values, my own character and integrity. And so that is still wrong. How about a private assisted suicide? Obviously, he didn't see anything wrong with that. And Copan's actually going to say a little bit more about that here in a moment. How about this statement? You can do whatever you want as long as it's in the privacy of your own home. Again, why should absolute autonomists insist on privacy as opposed to doing whatever wants in public? Why in private? Why does that matter? Shouting fire in a crowded theater or bomb on a transatlantic flight. Why don't just do that? And is child abuse or wife beating okay if it's done in the privacy of one's home, right? So we see the problems very clearly. Also this statement, people can believe and do whatever they want. They should just be tolerant of others' views. If the relativist believes that his or her views are true for them, but not necessarily for others, then why should they insist on laying that standard of tolerance out on everyone? Where does that standard come from? What if a person doesn't want to be tolerant? And moreover, here's the thing. If they're saying, Pete, you can do and believe whatever you want, but you have to be tolerant of others, well, then you're being intolerant of intolerant people. So that's a hypocrisy as well, right? This statement, you can do whatever you want, just don't violate another person's rights. Well, why would a relativist care about other person's rights or even understand rights? Where do rights come from in a godless world anyway? How can a relativist believe we can do what we want, but out the other side of the mouth insist that others' rights ought to be expected? The reality is, if everyone is doing what they want, everyone gets harmed. Because, I steal from the rich man, somebody steals from me, and somebody steals from that person. On and on it goes. However you look at it, wrongs committed are a community thing. It's a communal thing wherein one wrong equals less than human flourishing for the whole. Okay? Then he points this out. One can do a number of things without hurting others, quote unquote hurting others, but they would still be wrong. And so one of the things that he says is, or would we be wrong even, would we know that certain things are wrong even if they don't injure another, like physical injury? One example might be mocking a mental hospital patient whose mind is no longer connected to reality, leaving them incapable of making sense of the hateful things being said. Such actions don't physically hurt someone. These actions do damage the people that can hear that. What if that's the only person that is being able to hear it? Then you say, well, see, it's not hurting them because they don't know anyway. The problem with that is, obviously, you are putting them in a position where they no longer are human, where they have no dignity left. So in order to make that kind of claim, then you would have to say that that person has no human value at all. And if that's where relativism goes, then obviously it's bankrupt. Why should we think about this? What happens about this? What if a teenager says, I've struggled with a lot of mental illness or a lot of depression, and kids hate me, and I've been bullied, and I just want help to die. So you help them commit suicide, you encourage them to commit suicide. You say, I didn't hurt them. That's essentially what Kevorkian's saying, is this person says they don't want to go through suffering, so I'm helping them. You are not helping them, you are hurting them. And so it isn't right. We know it's not right. Courts have determined that this is not right. The Hippocratic Oath from centuries ago have said this is not right. We're in a millennia of modern medicine wherein we practice those ethical principles in medicine, and there's a reason why. And moral relativism and the circular way it leads nowhere is not going to change that. Fourth, while human freedom and choices are important, they must be considered in the context of broader issues, community, that life's a gift, that there's actually moral standards. Ironically, Kevorkian's philosophy of absolute autonomy is undermined by his qualifier, as long as you don't harm or threaten any other person. Despite his individualism, he's assuming that first, we're part of a larger community, because if he's saying, as long as you don't hurt other people. Okay, let me say this as well. If you're a family member of somebody who's had assisted suicide, I'm pretty sure that hurt you. So it's not fair to say that anyway. But assuming that you could hurt other people assumes community, assumes a thing in which we are not individuals. And in fact, we can't just say, if it's just good for me. It's impossible. As soon as you recognize that there's community involved, then you lose that possibility. So he says absolute autonomy exists. And if he says that, he's saying I don't need to regard others and I don't have moral duties to others. And so that would be irresponsible, of course. And he doesn't believe that. He didn't believe that when he was alive, because he talked about hurting others. So we see the hypocrisy of that. Another reason to reject absolute autonomy is that our lives are a gift from God. They are not a right. It's one thing to let a dying person die because their organs are naturally not working anymore. They are shutting down. Death is inevitable. It's going to come to us all. Those are processes which that are going to happen as part of the world in which we live. There is no assistance in that. You can say that somebody's, and this is kind of ethics, just a little piece of it, but you could say that what's the difference between that and assisted suicide and somebody saying, I'm not going to take I'm not going to take these medicines that are killing me anyway. Like somebody says, look, this chemo's terrible. I'm not going to do that anymore. They are not, you're not assisting, and they're not assisting themselves in death. Death is occurring already, and they are simply rejecting things that will either make them sicker or prolong suffering that's already occurring, that's already natural. And there is no assistance in that because there's no addition to that. So assistance is that you have to give them something. If you are pulled off of something, you're not given anything. So it's very different things. Okay. Um, Fifth, freedom is not an end to itself. It can often be coercive. Now think about that. Despite our positive associations with these terms of freedom and my individual freedom and what have you, freedom is a relative term. We're not free to rape, murder, or steal. We must first know what freedom is for, and this is a real linchpin, I think, in the argument about abortion. We're not free to do things that are coercive to others. And if there's human life in the womb and you take that life, then you are taking freedom from another life and calling it your own freedom. So it's kind of like I'm free to do what I want to, so I can murder you, I can steal from you, and what have you. But if I do those things, I am declaring myself, first of all, more important than you and the arbiter of what you should have in freedom. And so in doing so, I'm abusing the idea of freedom. And actually, I'm not actually practicing freedom. Because freedom, if you're going to use it as some universal term, it has to be free just as much for me as it is for the other person, okay? Furthermore, freedom may actually serve as a justification for coercion. Um, think of a woman's freedom of reproductive rights. Unborn children are coerced to comply with a woman's ethic of convenience. Mentally handicapped children forced into an institution by their independent-minded parents. For when freedom and enhancement becomes an end of itself, we lose any account of human life that gives content and it gives the direction to freedom. So what we find out is not only does moral relativism lead nowhere, but it is a very dangerous thing, and it is just complete hypocrisy. It never works itself out. And one of the things that I started with the apologetics, I was talking about being consistent. A worldview needs to be consistent. Moral relativism has the hardest time being consistent of any other worldview. Okay? And the reason is it's impossible to be consistent because you consistently have to be a hypocrite. This is okay, except in this position. A moral relativist should not be able to determine that there are rights, wrongs, laws to be had, or anything. So what they want to say is, well, it's whatever's that culture deems right and good. Again, that is a bad understanding of what is moral, and the reason is because truthfully, cultures do indeed come and go, and I would say any moral relativist caught up in a culture that, let's just say it's a lady and she is a moral relativist, and she's caught up in a culture into which men just get their way with all the women that they want, and that's just the way it is, and whether the woman agrees to it or not, that is the way it is, and they live and die in that way. I'll bet you that moral relativism is going to change in their minds really quickly if it is an issue of like us, and we live in the place we do, and we go to another culture, and a vastly different culture, especially like an East versus West thing. So let's just say we go to the East and we are visiting and we are observing a culture. One of the things that we will notice is there's certain universal norms in those things. Now, you might have heard some really silly lies about cultures that aren't ours, and I hear them all the time. Like, Muslims rape children all the time. That's just not even true. That's a lie. That ain't helping nobody to say that. And in fact, what you would find is more often than not, you would go to other cultures, and children are generally protected in cultures. Now, this is an interesting thing. that no matter where you go, there are certain things that are considered uh, norms that are almost universal. Not all the time, but almost universal. There's always some kind of property, of understanding of property and what's right or wrong regarding property. There's certain kinds of things that involve some kind of way that you are supposed to, again, protect children. So there are certain things that happen in every single culture and society that actually, even though they can be vastly different, that demonstrate that moral relativism can't be true, because these things couldn't quite happen as often as they do across time and space in all the different cultures. They have too many threads in common. Moral relativism doesn't work because it's just not reality. It's not the way reality, it works itself out, and it is not existent in human experience. And so when people say it's true for you, not for me, and things of that nature, now you got a little bit of ammunition to think about in terms of, a well to draw from as to why you can understand why that's not right and that's not wrong. An old trick would be like, the old, I guess, trick of evangelism would be, you believe what's right for you is right for me, and or that's all that matters is what I think is right or wrong. Yeah, sure, that's what I believe. Well, just take, say, can I take your watch? Here, I want it. That's right. That's what I think is right. Of course, I doubt many people would give their watch up. The point being, it just doesn't work. It's not possible, and there's nobody who believes in moral relativism that can actually maintain that philosophy. It just doesn't work out. But it's astonishing. The reason that it is astonishingly common to run across this is because it's one way not to have to admit some wrong in yourself. It's one way not to have to see sin. It's one way not to have to see the cross and empty tomb. It's one way to get to be your own autonomous person as far as your thoughts and religion goes. I posted this about Exodus 5 this morning because we're reading through Exodus together. I hope some of you are doing that anyway. Keeping up with my post in the morning, just a little thought on each chapter as we read through. And Exodus 5, you have Pharaoh who's like, I don't know who your God is. What's it matter? I ain't going to listen to him. You know what? Whether he knew that or not, it was still God. God was still sovereign. It was Israel's God, and he found out that it doesn't matter. It does not a matter of, well, that's not true for me. The thing is it true? Did God say this? Is God going to do this? And if it is, then what's true for me doesn't even matter anymore. I'm not even in the equation. Truth is what prevails or should prevail. And so that's just a little piece of where you find that in Exodus. You also see a piece of it like this. One of the things I've talked about in the last week is just the nature of like the exclusivity of the gospel. I did that a couple of days ago. Like there is only one way, and that is Jesus. That the gospel of Christianity is very exclusive, right? Well, here's the thing about that gospel that's exclusive. We actually see that in Exodus 5 because there's only one way for these Hebrew slaves to be liberated. There's only one God that Pharaoh can listen to or reject. All over the scriptures, this is painted as true. So I think it's interesting. You also see that, of course, in Elijah and the prophets of Baal, who danced around and cut themselves and cried out to call fire down from heaven, and they could do nothing of the sort. Elijah had no problem with that. God just provided it. And the thing is, they were crying, and in those moments, remember, they really are like, they think that the more they pour themselves into what they believe, the more it'll be true. Like, that's why they would cut themselves. Like, there's got to be these gods listening to me, and I'm going to get their attention. What choice will they have? It's like talking to a wall. It's like talking to air. It's talking to a figment of somebody's imagination, and it wasn't effective. Indeed, there was only one God, and only one they could cry to, and only one who could provide fire. And when they didn't listen to that, they were consumed because they didn't listen to the one and only truth. So remember that in your evangelism and in talking about morals and ethics and again, moral relativism. Again, if you want to, this is a short book, about 200 pages. It looks like it's 17 chapters. It's very entry level apologetics. It's something anybody can easily read and process quickly to be able to use. And this is why anybody listening to this video it can be perfectly well at home with this. It is When God Goes to Starbucks by Paul Copan. Okay, I think it was 2008. It was released. It's really good. It's got some good stuff in it. So that's just a suggestion for you. All right. Well, you all have a great evening. I posted the Bible study or the Bible questions for tonight. I probably won't post anything tomorrow, but I will. Again, Cindy will put the service up. We'll record that tomorrow. That'll be put up on Sunday as it has been. If you have prayer requests, please let me know because we can post those if you want them posted. And we love you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.